Let's give it up, a nice warm welcome for David Matter.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate that. As David mentioned, we were on this tour, and it was like a concert tour of 19 cities and a number of different nights at some of the cities, and so you tend to speak in a cadence that is almost annoying to yourself. So I'm going to try to change up that cadence. And it's tough though, because then I got to follow Greg, right? Greg is like, it's like a machine gun. Like I struggle because I'm not the smartest dude in the world, and it's like boom, 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 boom. So I'm going to slow the train down a little bit, but I'm going to try to get out of a cadence that I had because I was speaking to any dealer principals in here? Okay, no offense. I spoke to dealer principals in 19 cities, so I should win an award for that one for sure, for sure. So, when David asked me to speak, I wanted to name my presentation this, but I figured that at a Kain event it's probably not the most appropriate. So I wanted to dissect data, but do it in a way that is A, simple, and B, somewhat entertaining, so that when you walk out of here, you can do something well with it, so that you can execute well. Because, man, you can have like 40, 50, 60 things thrown at you, and then you get confused and you don't do any of them. I'm going to try to break mine down very, very simply today. And so, when I talk about that, and I knew that my clicker would fail me at some point. Hold on a second. Let me just restart it. I think it just enjoys Jay-Z. If you've been here in the past, as David mentioned, I've been fortunate enough to speak this is my fourth in a row. My first one, I didn't talk about anything related specifically to business. I talked about execution, and I talked about things that you can do that will help you in the business world, but most importantly in your personal life. And I shared personal experiences around that. The next year, then I took it and I said, okay, let's look at 2 points, and it was really about integrity and ethics. Our business ethics, our personal ethics, the way that we treat our family, our spouses, all that stuff. And you can still apply that when you go back to the dealership. Last year, I hit on game changers. And game changers was always fun and unique for me because I do honestly believe that there are people in this industry that instead of following the lead or trying to replicate things or reverse engineer, whatever you want to call it, they just don't care about what's going on around them. They just plod forward and they go and do their own things, and that is very unique. So we shared out of industry and in industry opportunities. But this year I'm going to take a completely different turn. I'm going to talk about data. And it's not because I am a part of Urban Science. They acquired my company last year. It's really because, well, actually it is in a way, because when you hang out with data scientists and nerds all day long, you start to see things that you've never seen before in the industry. It's really awesome, and don't tell them I call them nerds, but it gives you the ability to see something. And honestly, all of those kind of all align into common sense. So if you go back to some of those things that I talked about in years past, they allow you to just, if you have common sense, you move along. And data is the same way. People have this skewed view of what is important. So what I thought I would do is I would unclutter the noise, because there's way too much noise, because everybody has an opinion, right? Especially when you get on the vendor side. So if you're selling something, you're going to talk about the data that you have is very, very important, right? And how relevant it is. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to do the same thing. And then all of a sudden, you're like, holy crap, what is most important? So we're going to figure out how to cut through some of this noise. We're also going to figure out how to have some goals. Because what typically happens is, because we've got so many people telling us so many different things, then we change our goals. We change it weekly or monthly. And that happens a lot in our industry, and that shouldn't happen, honestly. It shouldn't. It doesn't matter what's going on in the industry, our goals associated with what we're trying to do shouldn't honestly change until you meet those goals, exceed those goals, and then you move on. But this is really where we fall short. We talk about this all the time, in our company especially, is that you can have great ideas, but if you don't execute well, then nothing really happens, and you become Nothing. Seriously, when you don't execute. So, the one thing though that I try to impress on people when I talk about what my background, especially in the car dealership side and the operations side, when I was at the dealership, whether I was selling cars or managing or running a dealership, or I was fortunate enough to be a CMO of a large dealer group for about 6.5 years. What I figured out really early on was that no two measuring sticks are the same, but it's because dealerships aren't the same. Like, they're literally different, every single one of them. We had 60 dealerships. Every single one of them was different in some way, shape, or form. But when you start figuring out where the benchmark is on the data side, it doesn't really matter where and how different the dealerships are. So, I live by this. Like, I'll tell you why I live by it. Because, I was fortunate to graduate high school. I dropped out of college. I am not the smartest dude in the world, right? I just want to figure out how to execute well. So I make things simple. Like, I have to make things simple. When people do puzzles, like, I can't do a puzzle because I can't do things that have 1,000 pieces. I can do things that have 2 pieces or 3 pieces or 4 pieces because I can figure out how that goes together. And data is honestly like a puzzle. And sometimes we go and we buy this most advanced puzzle set with all of the pieces when the reality is that we should look at it in 2 or 3 or 4 bites. So, I told you my agenda was going to be simple. I am not going to give you 40 things to write down and go and research and everything else. I'm going to give you 3. Like, what's the best data? We're going to agree to this. We're going to agree to this, and we're going to figure out how to agree to this, right? We're going to all walk out and be. You can do that, right? Like, we can all walk out and agree on one thing? Because our country does that really well. No. Okay, who has the best data? This is where it's going to get a little cloudy. And I will tell you, I'm going to talk about things. I'm going to share with you from a data volume perspective. Accuracy and volume. There's going to be more, and there's upstarts in this, so I'm not playing favorites. I am just going to communicate what we see from a volume and quality standpoint. And then, what do you do with it? I'm going to give you some practical examples of it. Just 3. That's all we're going to work on today. Good? We all bought in? We all agree to that, right? We can disagree on that. No, we're going to agree on that. Super. And we're going to hashtag. I'm sick and tired of, honestly, hearing big data. Like, is that pretty much done? I think best data is the way that if you're a dealership employee, if you're a dealership principal, honestly, all you care about is the best data to help you make decisions instead of going down and just randomly scrapping things or signing things. So, what's the best data? What do you think is the best data? If you could acquire anything right now, what is the most important thing to you? Curious. Anybody? Just give me one. Say that again? How many people have noticed your dealership? Okay. Anybody else? Nobody gets this right. Don't feel bad. You know what's most important? This is noise. This is why. So I could ask 50 different people, and they'll give me 50 different answers of what it is. This is noise. It could be what people think, how many people go to your stores, how many people visit your websites, how many people Google your name incorrectly, right? All of those things you think are important, nothing's important until you get to a point of knowing where this consideration is. And this is a lot of times where we fail. And we definitely failed early. When I was a CMO in 2004, OEMs were not doing a good job of doing any of this. Guess what we had to do? We had to do all of this. Somehow we still fall into some of these buckets of figuring out how do we do awareness and familiarity and consideration and everything else. You know what's the most important to you if you own a dealership? If I buy a car from you and if I service a car from you. Sales information and service RO information. If you think anything else is more important than that, man, I'd love to hear that argument. Seriously. Because we need to draw a straight line in the ability to understand what is important. And sales and service ROs they lend to every other piece of data being important. right? So you're starting to get it. You're like, okay, good. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, there's a lot of industry information that can help, right? This helps me. This gives me some kind of a KPI, some kind of an idea what's going on in the industry. New vehicle retail sales, like how many cars are actually selling everywhere for me to have an understanding of what I should be able to sell. How many vehicles are in operation? Like how many people are actually going to be in the market? Like that's a key indicator. That helps. Repair orders, overall. How many people are actually servicing their vehicles? And then financial accounts. So am I beating my head against the wall? Like if my dealer principal tells me that I have to average $1,250 a copy on every single new car that I sell, but the industry right now is in a funk and the financials are showing overall that I can only really probably get 1,000 because the market, the inventory and everything else, that's the kind of data that'll help. But that's not where we're going. This is just to get you started. This is where we need to start. There is unbelievable amounts of sales data out there. And nothing's more important for me, if I own a dealership, to know if the customers who are interested in buying cars have bought from me, or bought from someone else, or if they're people who have bought from me in the past, purchased from me in the past, if they are either out of the market because they purchased somewhere else. There's nothing worse than spending your money on consideration, whether it's on site traffic that you're generating, whether it's on direct campaigning, conquesting, when you're marketing to the people who are not in the market. It's stupid. So this is why it's important. I want to know out of my customer database every single customer who's in market. Is there a customer that is in equity? Is there a customer who hasn't, who we connected with, but might have interest in moving to a luxury vehicle? Like I should be able, I live in Atlanta, like I want to know the customers that are in my market area, under my influence, that have the ability to buy a car, right? And this is all available. Like this is all available. Yet we spend 80 to 90% of our time trying to figure out consideration. But we're doing it without the factual data to go after the customers that are in consideration. So once we do sales data match, we can also look at service ROs. And this isn't closed service ROs just in our own dealership. These are closed service ROs across our industry. And there is the information across our industry to allow you to do that. So not only customers, where is your store? Okay, so what kind of store?
Ford and Chrysler.
Awesome, let's just use Ford. So with Ford in Bedford, Indiana, my guess is you have not sold 100% of the Fords in that marketplace, right? And so my guess is that you'd also like to service the cars that you weren't selling there. And so that information is more important than the showroom visitors that he has in his showroom and the service drive customers that are in his service drive right now. Because that lends to getting those customers in the showroom and service and consideration and everything else. Starting to see how this works? Okay. This has nothing to do with anything. This is just funny because when I was doing a Google search, if you've ever spent one day in a service lane and had or run a store, you never get any information on RO, which is super funny, again, if you have to battle that, but has nothing to do with it. This has everything to do with it, showroom visits. So if we know sales and service, sales, I'm just going to put sales so that we know this means selling, number one. If we know that the next thing is showroom, and I'm just going to put drive, service drive, traffic. That's number two. That starts filling the gaps because what we know is that when customers hit a showroom, we know this from CRM data, we know this from some of our own data, we know that when customers hit a showroom, closing rates are at 60, 65%. It means people physically walk in and they buy at a very, very high rate. That's way better than worrying about the next level of leads. Leads are important. This is way more important. Let me ask you a dumb question. When people pull into your service drive, and I hate to keep picking on you, but you're my only dealer principal, so I'm going to pick on you for the rest of the thing. How many people come in and say they're just looking?
In the service lane.
There you go. Now do you get my point? Now you have a 100% close rate, or damn near 100%, right? 95. You might get the one idiot that comes in and says he's lost and he's going to the showroom. Now we're going to close him at 60%. Whatever that looks like, that's why it's most important. So we have service RO information, then we have drive traffic, and we know as long as we get them in there, especially in service, we have a super, super high close rate. Everybody agree? Now there's no question. That's most important after being able to figure out, did they buy, did they service? The next one are leads. Leads and chats, and I just threw everything together, so don't be offended if you fall into any of these buckets. Leads, calls, and chats are by extension leads, conversion opportunities. That's the next step, because if we do a good job with those, they lead to this and this. However, don't look at it that way. Look at it as, if we know this information, it helps us to do a better job of driving this information. Guess what? If we know what drives this, then we know how to counter with this and who to work with, right? Now you get it. The next step to this is website traffic. Important, not worthy of 80% of our conversation. Not even close. But it's important, because if you don't get that, then you don't get those other things. But if you have all of this in the right order, then you can make really awesome decisions around what you do with your website and the content within your website. Gives you great power, superpower. The next one, so I'm just going to write this down. I'm just going to write web. Now we get to traffic driving. Now everyone who drives traffic is now deeply offended at me because I have put them at the bottom of the rung. Don't be deeply offended. You know why? Because if a dealership, if my dealer principal looks at this, knows how to drive this in quality, which then leads to opportunity here, which then gives him the opportunity to really get smart here because of the data, guess what? Man, he's going to pick the best and the brightest around the drivers. And I'll tell you what, if you're on the vendor side, not that I'm catering to vendors, but guess what your cancellation rates will be around that? Like 0, right? But too many times, and I know this because I've been on the operations side and I've fired vendors and I've hired vendors, and I've been on the vendor side and I've been fired by people and hired by people. When we build business from here going up, fails. Anything that you look at fails. So, what does this really mean? Who has the best data? I know this is like, you're like, oh, here it comes. Don't get too excited. This is where the best data is. And there are a number of different people who can help you. Unfortunately, because we don't spend 80% of our time here, most of you don't ever tap into this. So there are great companies like Polk and Oracle and your own DMS systems that have this. But let me tell you where the inherent flaws, and my company, Urban Science, I'm not going to lie. You know what the difference is? When you have Reynolds or ADP, okay, so in your Reynolds box, he owns the dealership down the street, right? In your Reynolds box, do you know what he's selling and servicing? The answer is clearly no. That's where DMS data becomes one-dimensional, right? So then you tap into the Oracles and the Polks and the Urban Sciences of the world. And if you're not doing that, you're missing all of these opportunities. Why you want that is because then you start to see what the landscape looks like. You can start doing things, and where I started, and I started doing this back in 2005, we would do this every quarter. We would send all of our customers in our DMS system, all of our internet leads, everything, and match it up to sales data. And we did this for 2 reasons. We did this because we wanted to see our own performance against what was going on in the marketplace, but I also wanted to see who was not in the market anymore. Like, why would I go out and spend money and all of these other aspects on customers who were not in the market, right? The problem was that there was some latency in that time. And so one of the things that, that is unique in the space, and we do this mostly at the manufacturer level, but it can be done at the OEM level, is that we can do this in near real time. Like, we're seeing dealerships suppress, not just look at what was sold, but then suppress internet leads that came in last week, or other opportunity traffic that was only a week or two old. And instead of you busting your tail, calling people and responding to people that bought a Hyundai 3 days ago or 5 days ago, you're actually spending your quality time and going after consumers differently. Now do you see why the path of all of this information is so important? But the same thing can be held on service. Do you know how much stuff gets sent to customers who don't own their vehicle? I'm one of them. Like, I got rid of my Yukon 2 months ago. Now, I know it's only 2 months ago, but I got rid of a Jeep for one of my kids 4 years ago. Guess who still gets stuff on the Jeep? I get stuff on my Yukon. And I know that we go, but if I own the dealership, I do not want to be spending money on customers who don't own my car. And we can say, well, you know, they might be in the market for another car, and they say that. No, they think you're stupid. Honestly, have you ever gotten one of those? Like, I think the Chrysler dealership in my market is stupid because I'm still getting marketed on a car that I clearly don't own. And that's where companies like this can help you, where they start to see things not within just your dealership walls, but they can see outside. And so they can help you start marketing correctly because they fill the gap of the service side, the RO side. But then you have showroom visit validation. And I didn't have enough space to put, but I put the leaders. Like, CRMs should be the leaders, right? The problem with CRMs is that it's manual entered information. It's not exact all the time. So we're held to a bar that we have to put this information in. Next up is different. They're not CRM, but if you know anything about them, they have lots of data. There's a lot of data. So CRMs are here. And then you have, next up, because of the showroom control, they get a lot of data. We do some stuff obviously around that, in validating customers physically in a showroom. But when you start seeing this and you start layering it right behind your sales and service information, then your decision making becomes way more clear, because if we know that this information, if DealerSocket's my CRM, and I go in and I look at my week in review, and I know that when people physically come in, that 54% of them are closing, like I'm closing the deal. Or, more importantly, because I have really good sales data that's fueling all of that, that I know that 54% of the customers bought from me, but another 16% left my dealership, physically left my dealership, and went and bought a car somewhere else. Either the same make, a Ford, or they went down the street and bought a Chevy. Do you know what kind of information what that does, that powers you to make great decisions? Not just advertising decisions, operational decisions. Like, we have dealerships that are using that down to a salesperson level and actually know the salespeople who are in control of their customers and the ones that don't have any control of their customers, and they're going and they're leaving and buying the same car somewhere else. That's how powerful data can be for you. But the same can be said around lead generation. If you know what drives your showroom traffic, then you make really smart decisions about the people who are here. And I will tell you, I think, and I don't want to take this out of context. I think call tracking is absolutely one of the smartest things that you could do, right? And so I don't understand the SEO values over 800 number of verses. I'm not ever going to argue that, but I will argue the data, because I can absolutely tell you that that data, flushed up against all of the things that we've just talked about, is the most valuable information that you could apply towards that, bar none, right? So if we know that, and then we start engaging other things, whether it's in chat or in lead generation or in any of the things that are going to help us with conversion based on what we know from the showroom and our service drive, then it makes it very, very simple for us to do that. So then we look at the analytics from our own sites, and there are multiple site providers. I put the ones that have the biggest land grab that have arguably the most data. Like I love going and talking to, whether it's DealerOn or Dealer.com or Dealer Inspire, whoever it is, I know that they're not going to give me a one-dimensional look. They've got a lot of stuff across the board. And so that's something that you could do as well. But don't do it until you have all of those other ducks in a row. Do you know how smart you are? If you walk into a room and say, hey, we know of on our own customer base that we own X%, right? And on both sales and service. And we know that when we get them into the showroom, we close at 60 and 100, right? 100%, right? So, and then we know, based off of this, we know what's going to generate the leads that close at that. And then, guess what I'm doing? I'm making one hell of a good decision when I pick website providers, right? Or I go to them and say, look, this is what I have. How do you figure out how to mesh what you know with what I know? And then you make some really, really, really wise choices. Then it's fun, because then you can start entertaining the traffic drivers and seeing which ones work and which ones don't, and calling out the ones that don't, firing the ones that don't, and working with the ones that do, and working with them in much better synergy than you've ever had before. It gives you a way of making quick, easy decisions and not just doing it based off of how much they cost, because you don't know what they sell, right? So, who's taking all the hype around big data and turning it into an actionable thing? This is when my guess is you're going to think, oh, well, they're going to start showing stuff that they do. I am absolutely not going to show you stuff that I do. If I were to buy a dealership today, this is what I would do. And I don't own an equity mining company. I have no interest in one. I don't even really honestly know exactly how they do what they do, other than common sense tells me they work within the database. If I were to buy a dealership today, it would be the #1 thing that I would do, like bar none. Bar none. Because I have a foundation of information that's going to be executed on. Guess what they do? They look at sales and service data, and what do? They try to drive in customers into your showroom and your service drive. Like, see how this works? It's not hard. And they're going to generate opportunities, which by extension are leads, but they're your own leads. And so no matter what the industry does, like who was in the business in 2008? Put your hands up high. You should be proud that you're still freaking here. Like seriously, honestly. That was a rough time, man. Guess what? When you build your business from this, and I know this to be true because I built a business on this. Everybody thought we were awesome at digital marketing. Honestly, we were good at digital marketing. We just had the ability to go do a bunch of crazy stuff because our foundation was rooted in the data. That was clear. So, this is what I would do. Again, not my company. If you're not doing equity mining, I would leave here. I'd find, I don't even know do we have equity mining companies here? Hey, look at that. You're like, thank you, right? Okay, I deserve a little bit of, maybe a cocktail at dinner. Okay, good. I didn't even ask him who he was with. Common sense. Work your data. If I know the people and I let them know because they already like me, let them know that they can get into a car for the same or lower, like common sense, right? Told you, I'm a simple guy. You give me a couple pieces of the puzzle, I can figure this stuff out. The same way with our service. Anything that relates to your own database that you can leverage to go and communicate with them is smart. And you know why it's smart? Because you build a foundation and then everything else, it takes the pressure off of your digital marketing, which is typically conquest marketing, which is tough, especially if you do it backwards. Then it becomes impossible. And quite frankly, so complex that too many people get fired for it. Like I was fortunate to make it 6.5 years in my organization. CMOs or those digital marketing VPs, or like they have a shelf life like this. You know why? Because they got too many pieces on the puzzle all out on the table. They don't start with great foundational pieces like this.
Go back to that screen.
Okay, sure, no problem. Look at that.
There you go.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
No. Everybody get this? Like there are simple things that you do, but you base it on the path of the information that we've covered so far. So then when you get an equity company, and I don't know if all of them do this, but if they can then add some of that digital flavor into it where they're looking at behavior of your customers so that it's one more indicator, like how bad is that? That's great because it serves every other thing that we're doing. I'm going to continue to point to this because my hope is that you'll get this. Like you won't go up, you'll go down. Service Smarts is the same thing. The majority of you guys have Service Smarts. You may not know you have Service Smarts because your manufacturer has paid for it. And if you're not paying for it, you might not be as aware of it. But you know what Service Smarts tells you? It tells you who you should be marketing to in your service drive. But even cooler, and you can say that you heard it from me, was even cooler, they have the customers. You know how I used the Ford example earlier when I said, would he like to market to other people who have Fords but didn't buy from him? That shows in that market analysis. So all of a sudden, I'm getting like head nods, yeah, so you guys have used it. And guess what you can do with the information? They've just simplified my path. They've just simplified my path. And then you can execute however you want. You can work with your agency to do direct mail and email. You can do pretty much anything to execute those customers to come into your showroom or your service drive in this case and have a 100% close rate. 100%. They're not just looking. So how do you execute on this? I think simple. You first come up with a plan and a strategy, and I am trying to influence you for that to be your plan. Think sales and service information first, and don't be one-dimensional. Don't think about your DMS box as the all things sales and service related, because it's not even close. You want to be able to look at that sales and service data across your market area and be able to set a plan of action to the customers, whatever you figure out from that. Customers who bought from you, who don't service, customers who didn't buy from you, that do service, customers that, we can go in through all of the different options, right? So that's where you start your basic plan. And you develop a playbook. Like, don't mess around. If you came here, obviously you came here. You didn't come to Lexington, Ohio, or Lexington, Kentucky. I'm from Ohio. I should know that Lexington's. That's how stupid I am, right? Barely graduated from high school. You didn't come to Lexington, Kentucky to go hang out in the nightlife and, it's not Vegas. You came here to learn. And that's why I get so inspired to come here every year to teach, because my hope is that you go and you develop the playbook, you write this stuff down, you make it simple, and you make yourself important to your dealer principals, to the ownership group or whatever the structure is, right? Because you have a plan, your playbook. I did this, just so you know. I was 33 when I became Chief Marketing Officer. Some of you heard that. I was the most ill-equipped person to ever be a CMO of a dealer group. The most ill-equipped person, right? I didn't even know what a marketing officer did. I had to go and look it up. And you got to remember, this is back in 2004 when there wasn't a lot of information on Google, especially around CMOs. So I put together a plan, what I thought, because based on everything that I read and what people told me, I went back in and I had a playbook in my first year. And I remember going into the executive board where there were 4 guys my senior, all 10 years older than me, at least 10 years older than me. And I go in there as I'm the punk kid. I didn't even feel worthy of sitting at the table. At Thanksgiving where they put you at the kids' table? I was waiting for that. So I slipped my playbook across in my first year. And I basically went through that and I said, we're going to clean up our database, we're going to do this, we're going to be able to figure out who's in market, who's out in market, service, blah, 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 blah. And they did what? Huh? They laughed. They didn't buy it. They laughed at me. You know why? Because nobody else ever went through that. They were always trying to figure out how to go bottom up. And so they only knew what they knew. And I wasn't doing what they knew. And I didn't know any better. That was the great thing about being me. I had no clue. I just said, let's do this. And guess what started to happen? Started checking things off the playbook all the way down. So the last meeting of the year, I went in, and by that time, I think we had a projector, not as cool as that one, and I put it up, and I had a line drawn through each one of them. And you know what? I became important to the organization. More importantly, it became important to the dealerships. So that when 2008 happened, they trusted the path in which we had created, which is a big deal. So don't go in with complex 100-piece puzzles. Go in with 2 or 3 pieces. Simplify your plan and follow that plan and be diligent. Because if you get fired for firing on a simple plan, then it probably wasn't to be anyways, right? But my guess, if I'm a dealer principal and you come to me and you go, look, I'm going to base this off of this, this, and this, that's going to hit my common sense meter pretty quickly. And I'm going to be like, yep, I'm in. If you're going to tell me that you're going to do this based on factual data of sales or service ROs, and it's based off of how many people come in, my showroom or my service drive, then I'm in. But also know your tools. Like seriously, know your tools. Service smarts and your equity mining tools and everything else. When I say know them, just don't know about them. Know them intimately. The one other thing because I didn't know any better, most executives don't give a crap about how things work. I did, because I didn't want anybody to pull the wool over my eyes because I knew it wasn't all that smart. Seriously. I think I'm making light of it. It's because it's the truth. Like, I didn't want somebody to tell me something that most people would just take, because dealer principals do this all the time, because they don't pay attention, they don't know all this stuff. You get a lot of digital marketers, more importantly, vendors that come in and pull the wool over people's eyes. And it's because they have no knowledge of it, right? So know your tools, know exactly how they work, why they work, and the data that sits within them. And then set goals and benchmark yourself. Like, know what's going on in the industry so that you're not reaching for something, because that's when you will get fired. You need to be realistic about what's going on in the industry overall and how you do that. So if you see a shift in like high inventory levels that are going to potentially hurt what's going on in cost or your gross profit per sale, then shift into something else and use cars or service. And know that you're going to take a little bit of dip there, but go in through. Here's another tidbit of advice. Website visits are super important. Again, behind all of this, it's a great indicator. So you said it earlier. It is. It's a great indicator of what's going on. 2008, we knew 2008 was coming before October because you could see it start to dip. Start looking at your website visits over the last 3 or 4 months. Now, elections tend to do some of that, but just continue to watch it and see what goes on, because that should be the indicator for inventory and other marketing type of things, because that's part of the path. So, conventional thinking says the dealerships have to choose between high sales or high profitability. That's absolutely incorrect. When you're not using that path, it is correct. But when dealerships really start looking at sales effectiveness and knowing what's going on in the marketing trends, it makes it easier for them to figure out how to be in a win-win situation. And so we see dealerships that will just absolutely crush in a market because of using that methodology and continuing to get better and systematically changing things and enhancing things so that they sell more cars and service more cars. Don't be this. When I first started at Mile One, the president of our company said this. He was proud of it. I wasn't. I thought it was demeaning to me and my job. Don't think that advertising is just path. You'll know where the money is. I wanted to know exactly what every dollar, and it never got to 100%, but I sure as hell wasn't at 50%, and it made our business better. So, how do you go, because this is a big shift, how do you go from your gut, because especially at the dealer principal level, that's how they got there, to some kind of prescriptive motion. You can do that if you follow the path all the way down. Open your data kimono, because you have a lot of it, and you have the opportunity for it. And with that, I say thank you so much. Look at that, 4 minutes early. What about that? I just gave you 4 of the 46 minutes that I ran over in the Compass store.
We are open for questions, so take advantage of having an expert in the room if anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question. Good news is, yes, Donald?
The last slide.
Or Benjamin, I'm sorry.
The last slide it showed, or before that, showed, okay, so it wasn't the last slide. The S4 Navigate applied.
Yeah.
I assume that is an AutoHook product?
It's an urban science product, and I try not to, I didn't want to talk through specifics of it, but it is. It's a solution that OEMs and dealerships use at that level to figure out how to move, actually the better one, and you can do this, anybody can do this, right? You don't have to have a product to do it. You can figure out, there are basically 4 things that, that will help you into the win-win. Inventory, I know I'm going to get these wrong. Inventory, if you have the right inventory, the right type of inventory, right? Traffic can be website traffic, dealership traffic, right? You have advertising that's in that quadrant, and then dealership operations. And typically what we find is that dealership will have traffic, enough traffic, a lot of traffic. They have a lot of advertising. They might even have the right inventory. What they don't have is dealership operations, like when the customer physically gets here. And that's why this is so important, because then you figure this out, right? And then you fix it. And then everything else, it's not this dude's fault who drives great traffic, right? It was here, it was broken here. And you fix it, and then you move on. And that's how you get to win-win. And then or then you find out that you don't have the right inventory because now you've upped your advertising, and you're like, holy crap, I don't have enough of the Silverado extended cab, 4x4, 6.5 foot bed, whatever it is. And so it's an evolving thing. So, but you can do that. It's not that hard. It's just 4 puzzle pieces.
Any other questions? So David will be available at the AutoHook booth. So if y'all could welcome him or thank him for his presentation, I would sure appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great job.